Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono's first visit to China since assuming his post brought attention on the potential turning point of China-Japan ties through both countries commemorating the 40th anniversary of the Peace and Friendship Treaty. Mr. Kono emphasized that Japan is willing to work with China under the Belt and Road Initiative and cooperate on projects that abide by international standards. However, disputes over the Diaoyu Islands and the Japanese government's ambiguous attitude on historical issues remain as obstacles. The Chinese Foreign Minister urged Japan to put words into action in improving ties. How do we evaluate the current Sino-Japanese relations and its future? Will Japan's participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative strengthen ties as Abe pushes the new version of the TPP without the U.S. leadership? And how will Sino-Japanese ties influence East Asia and the Korean Peninsula? To discuss these issues and more, today I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Rong Ying, who is the Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. We shall also talk to Professor Takasato Watanabe at Dorchester University via telephone. That's our topic. This is the dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. But before we start it, let's look at this.
At the start of the 40th anniversary for the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between China and Japan, both sides hope 2018 will be the year the two live up to the goal of peace and friendship.
Improving and developing Sino-Japanese relations is in the interest of both countries, and it is the common aspiration of various social sectors in the two countries. Now, Sino-Japanese relations are at a crucial stage. There is positive progress as well as interference and obstacles. Historically, Sino-Japanese relations have been like sailing against the current. You either forge ahead or drift downstream.
And forge ahead it is, as both sides already agreed on Sunday to make the East China Sea a sea of friendship and cooperation, and to have the China-Japan maritime and air communication mechanism in place as soon as possible. And Japan hopes to have reciprocal visits by top leaders this year.
It's 40 years since we made a treaty on peace and friendship. My mission is to shape the relations today in that image. We hope by having reciprocal visits by our heads of states, we will see better bilateral relations in all sectors.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has made bettering ties with China one of his major missions for the new year, as he has promised to work with China on all fronts, especially on Asia's infrastructural needs. Japan has also expressed a positive attitude towards getting involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that China welcomes the well-meaning gestures of late, and it also hopes that Japan will match its words to its deeds and not backtrack from what both sides have now.
Mr. Rong, Foreign Minister Taro Kono may have released a trial balloon by receiving an interview from the Phoenix satellite. What do you think of the points he delivered through this interview that may have set a tone for his official visit, the first of its kind since he assumed office?
Well, of course, it's a very important interview. I heard that it is the first ever interview he gave to a Chinese press. Of course, this is Hong Kong-based Phoenix. I think during the interview, I noticed that he put forward I sent out some very positive signals. For example, including his personal experiences as his family, as father, was a very well-known politician, statesman, and for a friendly relationship between China and Japan. That is the most important
What's
thing.
The background of his father?
His father is the speaker of the Diet, and it's a very respected, highly respected statesman, politician in Japan, promoting or advocating a friendly and close relation between China and Japan. But as a foreign minister, I think he also played a role in fulfilling, I think, the Japanese government's sort of policy, implement policy by promoting a good relationship, friendly relationship. So his interview, you see a lot of positive notes, but of course he also mentioned some of the problems between the two countries. For example, how to manage the disputes, the Diaoyu disputes, and how to make sure that some of the agreement, for example, the maritime and aerial communication mechanism that has been agreed upon between the two countries recently that are being implemented. He also talked about, of course, about how to promote and expand the people-to-people interactions by relaxing visa regulations. So
by the way, how many Chinese visited Japan as tourists last year?
Yes, that's a lot indeed. I think the latest figure is 7 million
7
visits.
million.
7 million. And it's been growing exponentially, which helps, I think, the two countries.
That might be a shot in the arm for the Japanese economy, because the purchasing power of the Chinese tourists could not be underestimated.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's both the Japanese economy certainly benefit a lot, and also I think it also helps the two peoples of the two countries to have a better understanding. After all, that these face-to-face sort of meetings or personal experience helps. Despite the fact that is also important, because despite the fact that China and Japan are close neighbors, we ordinary people don't know very well. They only know themselves either through media or others. Sometimes tend to be biased or not real. So I thought that the growing visits by the Chinese tourists to Japan. But I also hope personally that there will be more Japanese tourists continue to visit China. This is also changing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let me cross over to Professor Watanabe in Daoshinsha University. He's standing by there on the phone. Hello, Professor Watanabe.
Hello.
Are you optimistic, cautiously optimistic, or pessimistic about achieving a breakthrough through this ice-breaking visit to mend the ties between Tokyo and Beijing?
Fundamentally, Japan and China, you see, two countries must be close friends. It is true, and I hope so. However, now you see the main concerns of the Japanese politicians, of not only of the Mr. Abe, but also the Taro Kono, both are considered to be the candidates for the coming election of the president of the LDP ruling party. So Mr. Kono has changed a little to the right side compared to those expressed by him in the past 1 decade or so. As your commentator, guest said, I agree with almost all he has said, but now, you see, just before the election, even Mr. Kono, he must express very strong words against China this time, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rong. Domestically, do you think this current official visit by Mr. Kono will assist Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to win the election? There's no doubt that he's going to win the election because the LDP is in a very strong position. Despite the strong opposition from domestic constituency towards the amendment of the pacifist constitution. What do you think of the relationship between Japan's diplomacy and its domestic politics?
Well, diplomacy certainly, I think, helps. But for me, I think the most important is economy and how Japanese economy would be doing. That is the most important thing for the Abe administration. And for the coming election of the party, LDP, in September, I think the Japanese economy, how it's going to do, is it going to continue to enjoy the upward sort of growth, would it be more important. But because China, stable relationship with China, Japan stable with China, would help Japan economically. That I think also helps. Or to some extent, I think, answer the question why the Japanese administration, Abe administration, is now attaching more importance to a stable, close relationship with China. But otherwise, I think the We have seen a positive trends. We have seen a positive momentum that ever since, I think, early last year, then when the relationship is now more or less on the stable and track for development.
Given the uncertainty and roller coaster nature of the bilateral relationship for decades, since the normalization of the ties in the early 1970s, we have a clear feeling that despite the frosty political ties and mistrust, business ties remained pretty robust. In Chinese, we call it 正冷经热. But today, you said clearly that the official visit and the good wishes by Japanese politicians to improve the ties would help improve the economic relationship. What's your understatement in this broad context?
Well, I mean, economically, given the fact that the two countries, China and Japan, are the second and the third largest economies in the world, there's always great potential, huge potential for closer relationship, on practical cooperation on many areas. And of course, the past, if you look at the history of the relationship, and there are a lot of changes. I think in terms of the structure of the trade and economic relationship, China's economy has been growing so fast, and the huge potential of China as a market. And that is very important for Japan. As we just talked about, the Chinese tourism, the purchasing power, and so on and so forth. So, but Japan, on the other hand, is also changing. I mean, in particular in demographic terms, so aging population and others. So I believe that in looking ahead, the two countries now working very closely on areas where they can work together, particularly on some of them are, I think, for example, environmental conservative issues, and others like financial sectors and the service sector, and so on and so forth.
You know, Mr. Rong, I have been following the official rhetoric of the Chinese government concerning the relationship. Two catchphrases captured my attention. First is, we ask the Japanese government to put their words into action. We not only read your lips, but also we pay particular attention to your actions. Second is, we urge the Japanese government to view the development of China more as an opportunity instead of a threat. Now, what is the response from Tokyo?
I think in rhetoric or in words, the government of Japan, Abe administration included, has now openly, publicly acknowledge that China's development, China's rise as constitutes an opportunity. But in reality, well, from time to time, particularly in the past few years, you will find that diplomatically, politically, in the regional context and internationally, the Japanese government is waging a kind of a campaign, I think, meant to or aimed at counterbalance China. And so that is, I think, a disparity. And this is largely related to a consensus, strategic consensus between the two governments previously, that the two sides view each other, the development, as an opportunity, not a threat, and the two sides agree to support each other's development. So the Chinese side naturally would ask the question that whether what the Japanese government doing is honor the commitment or just against that agreement. So this is very important. But in the context as China is rising, China has overtaken Japan in economically in GDP terms, not per capita, but in GDP terms. So that naturally raises the question is whether Japan politically and in a strategic context continue to view China as an opportunity.
Whether China is viewed as a threat or an opportunity largely depends on whether China has developed its own soft power to appeal to the mind and heart of the Japanese. So that's a different issue. Now, other than the positive attitude of Mr. Kono in his interview with the Phoenix Satellite, which is based in Hong Kong, what do you think of the positive posture that the foreign Prime Minister Shinzo Abe displayed last year to celebrate our National Day in Tokyo?
Well, of course, Prime Minister Abe is really a figure or really a politician the Chinese people are looking at.
Was that, by the way, was that a surprise for the Chinese government that the Prime Minister Abe himself showed up to attend the National Day celebration?
Of course, it was a happy surprise because one can imagine that a kind of a National Day reception. It's an ordinary one, and of course in the past it was attended by Japanese politicians and Prime Minister included, but for this last year's National Day reception it was a happy surprise. I was told that originally the Japanese government was saying that they would send the chief cabinet minister to attend, but later and in the end it came Prime Minister himself came, and he came. And he also made a very important speech expressing that the Japanese government, he himself attached great importance to a stable relationship. He wanted to improve the relation and making it a priority of his policy to improve the relation. So I thought this is a very positive and signal.
That's indeed very encouraging. Let me go back to Professor Watanabe. In his interview with the Phoenix satellite, Mr. Kono didn't mention words like controversial territory or territory in disputes concerning Diaoyu Islands, and in Japanese you call it Shinkaku Islands. Instead, Mr. Kono ended up using words like factor of uncertainty to refer to the different or competing claims concerning the Diaoyu Islands. Do you think this indicates a sea change in the Japanese attitude towards an issue of common concern between the two sides?
As I said before, now the Japanese politics is into a very delicate situation. The most important factors is the change of the domestic politics. Now, you see, the biggest issue in Japan is the constitution change, division, and also North Korean problem. But in the media, it is true, but inside the politics, to get the more economic development is important, as was pointed out by you, and so that Mr. Kono wants to support any idea which promotes the economic development for Japan, including Belt and Road Initiative by China. And also, Mr. Kono, he admits the increase of the weapons import from United States suggested by the Mr. Abe. So this is very delicate. He said to get more weapons from the United States makes the increase of the menace of Japan and United States against China, not only for North Korea. So these must be, you see, elements which makes the relations between Japan and China more complicated. But I believe that China and Japan and South Korea, if they can talk frankly, I think those problems can be solved together with the development of the economy and also peace order.
Thank you so much, Professor Watanabe. Mr. Rong, Tokyo wants to invite the Chinese Prime Minister or Premier Li Keqiang to visit Japan for a trilateral summit with South Korea. And Mr. Kono, the Foreign Minister of Japan, hopes to confirm that Tokyo and Beijing could make steady progress in improving bilateral ties by facilitating reciprocal visits between Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Chinese President Xi Jinping. What do you think of the momentum?
I think that so far the momentum is positive, and I think it is good. And if that momentum continues, it will certainly create a better environment, favorable environment and ground for the resumption of high-level visits between the two countries. If I remember correctly, I think the last visit was 2012, when the former Prime Minister Noda-san came to Beijing to attend the trilateral China-Japan and South Korea trilateral summit. And after that, because of the series of incidents and the relationship deteriorated to the extent that even at the minister level, I think the foreign minister between the foreign ministers, I mean, the Chinese foreign minister has not visited Japan. And so I hope that, because this year is very important, it is the 40th anniversary of the signing of that treaty for peace and friendship. So both sides have expressed the readiness and to commemorate this big event, this special year, and you make sure that there will be more positive development, that the momentum will continue. So let us hope first that the trilateral meetings between the three leaders, China, Japan, and South Korea, would convene as early at an early date, and then during the visit to see if it's possible that Chinese premier would be also ready to make an official visit. And of course, it all depends on Japan's relation with South Korea. And by the way, interestingly, South Korean leaders has not visited visited Japan. So this is, I think, a lot of big events.
Yes, indeed. Viewers, observers, and policymakers are always entertained by the idea of a regional integration. Well, the trilateral regional communication or integration between these three major economies in Northeast Asia aside, let's look at the issue of TPP. Now, Japan and Canada may have achieved a breakthrough in reaching an agreement that the process of TPP should go ahead despite the absence of American leadership. And the end statement suggests clearly that Tokyo would take over the leadership automatically. At the same time, this year marks the second anniversary of the AIIB. Its members increased from 58 to 84, and the projects sponsored by AIIB spread to 12 countries, which benefit enormously from the investment, mostly in case of infrastructure building. What do you think of the proactive diplomacy economically by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to advance the process of the TPP?
TPP is, of course, an initiative put forward, started with, long time ago by some smaller countries in the region, Brunei and others. And then it took over by the U.S., and then later on followed by Japan. And interestingly, I think it took a great debate, a heated debate, to finally to come into terms to the fact that TPP is important for Japan. And but of course, when the Trump, and we all know the Trump administration came, and then they announced that to withdraw it. So later on, Japan, for the sake of this agreement, it worked together with the other 10 members to have that abridged, a simplified version of TPP, which called CPTPP. And then they reached an agreement, and I think it is now announced that in March, early March, they were signed that agreement, which means that there will be finally to come into effective. And then the news again came that President Trump announced that they would reconsider to join the TPP. But of course, it has to be going through some negotiations. The Japanese, I think, I was again a happy surprise. But again, Japanese were also worried that if U.S. would rejoin TPP, then it would go another long process, difficult process of negotiation, which is not necessarily good for them.
In fact, I fell short of mentioning a very important point concerning, by raising the issue of the AIIB. What's the relationship between the ADB, Asia Development Bank, and AIIB? Because previously, when we first put forward the idea of AIIB, the Japanese government rejected immediately this idea that allegedly aims to compete with the ADB, saying we have already done a lot in investing in the infrastructure building. What's the point of having AIIB? Today, the Japanese government says clearly they are interested in some of the projects of AIIB on condition that the project live up to international standards. What do they mean?
ADB is much, it's an older and more established institution, regional ones. It was, of course, initiated by Japanese more than 50 years ago, 1967. And then later on, I think as the region, grows, and it was ADB which came up and reported that there's a huge demand for infrastructure, which the existing institutions, including ADB, are not able to meet. That's where comes into the AIIB, which is primarily for infrastructure. And China made it very clear this initiative is meant to complement, not to compete with existing institutions like ADB. That's why it has, ever since it came up, the idea that it received a wide range of support, including countries in South Asia, Australia, and of course UK and others. Now we, as you said, that we have 84. Japan, I think, surprisingly, for some reason, it said no when the Chinese, in the initial stage, came to talk with the Japanese, literally inviting Japan to be part of that. And of course, now the situation is changing. The Japanese, and I think, came to realize that by saying no does not necessarily mean it would help. So Japan, I think, now changing mind. I hope, and I think, looking at the possibility that it would work together with AIIB for possible areas of infrastructure through means of co-financing and others. I thought this is belated but welcome development from the Japanese government.
It seems during the administration of Shinzo Abe, most of the foreign policy options of Tokyo aim to restrict and regulate the growing influence of China, either through global visits to industrial nations of G7 or inviting leaders of ASEAN to visit Tokyo or make more investment in these neighboring economies of Southeast Asia. Now, it seems Tokyo is quietly and subtly adjusting its foreign policy after Mr. Donald Trump took office, because Mr. Trump prioritized the American stakes by saying, oh, we put America first, and even pull out of the TPP. Therefore, Tokyo was surprised. Do you think it is against this backdrop that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe would start thinking, hey, come on, our American friends are not very reliable, particularly during the Trump administration, so let's get closer to China to use this fence-mending effort as a hedge against the geopolitical risks which arise from the presidency of Donald Trump. Do you think this is logical?
There are, I think, some scholars, some schools of thought that speculating that Japan's sort of policies towards China, as I discussed, are becoming more sort of positive, more constructive, is largely because of the uncertainties or unpredictabilities caused by the Trump administration, the Trump American First and others. And, but there are others also arguing that even in Japan that the Japanese government, the Abe administration, has managed the relationship very well. So in the sense that they thought that it may not necessarily, I think, the case. But my observation, I would say that for Japan, a stable and friendly and healthy relationship with China serve the best interest for Japan and for the region. So I thought that this is only natural, and that Japan would come back to the right track to pursue a relationship that we are talking about. And
thank you so much. In some probability, yes, the trilateral summit may happen as scheduled due to the proactive diplomacy of Tokyo. I'll see you next time.